The sun of Zoran burned with a fierce light. Every morning the sky grew white, and the heat pressed down upon the people until their skin felt dry and their lips ached. This was a planet where water was not just a drink. It was life, power, and law. Wells were guarded, springs were measured, and every drop was counted. To waste water was worse than to waste food. To give water was not kindness, it was privilege. In the middle of this world lived a girl named Nira. She was young, yet her face already carried the lines of struggle. Her skin had grown rough from the dust and her eyes often lowered to the ground. She belonged to the Shara, a group marked as impure by the ruling clans. They worked the hardest but were given the least. The Shara were allowed to build homes, to grow crops in the dry soil, and to carry goods. Yet they were forbidden to drink from the wells that stood in the center of every village. If thirst overcame them, they had to search the rocks and the sands for small hidden pools, or they had to beg for drops from travelers. The laws of the clan said this was the natural way. The Shara were not worthy of pure water. Every day Nira walked to the trade station with bundles of cloth. The station was a wide circle of stone built by the old rulers long before her time. Around its edges stood stalls where goods were exchanged. Here food, metals, and fabrics were traded for water or for other supplies. The center of the station had a large well, its surface covered by a heavy grate. Guards stood nearby with spears, their eyes sharp. No one approached without permission. When Nira carried her bundles, she often felt her throat burning. The air itself seemed to steal the moisture from her body. Yet she walked step by step with no sign of complaint. She had learned that to complain was useless. Her people were always told that they must accept their place. That morning, something unusual happened. Strange ships had landed at the edge of the desert. Outsiders had come. Nira had seen their silver craft shining in the distance, smoother and brighter than any structure on Zoran. Now some of the strangers stood inside the station. They looked different. Their clothes were strong but simple, made of fabrics not woven on this planet. Their speech carried a new rhythm, though most had learned the local tongue quickly. Among them was one figure who seemed to draw curious eyes, a human man named Tomas. The people of Zoran did not know much about humans, only that they came from far beyond the stars. They were said to travel easily through space, to move across darkness as if it were open sea. Tomas was taller than most of the clans, his skin pale compared to the sun-browned faces of the desert folk. His hair was dark, his movements steady, and his eyes watchful. Tomas carried a flask at his side. It was not a small cup or a clay jug like the ones Zoran people used. It was a smooth metal container shining even in the dust. He often drank from it, and whenever he did, some of the crowd stared. The Shara especially noticed, for he drank without fear or secrecy. To them, the sight was painful yet impossible to ignore. Nira passed him while laying out her cloth at the edge of the circle. She saw him lift the flask, tilt it back, and take a long swallow. She tried to look away, but her body betrayed her. Her tongue moved across her lips, dry and cracked. Her throat tightened as though it remembered the taste of water long gone. The clans noticed this too. One elder muttered that the Shara should not stare at what was not theirs. Another laughed quietly, saying it was the way of the impure to desire what they did not deserve. The words reached Nira's ears, but she did not answer. She only bent her head lower and arranged her cloth as neatly as she could. Thomas did not seem to understand the full meaning of these whispers, but he understood enough. He saw how the girl's eyes had followed the flask for a brief moment, and how quickly she looked away when the elders spoke. He saw the way she moved with care, as though any mistake might invite scorn. That evening, when the sun sank and the sky turned red, the air grew cooler. Traders packed their goods, guards shifted their stance, and the well was sealed for the night. The Shara returned to their side of the village, where small houses of stone stood close together. Nira walked slowly, her steps uneven. She had worked long in the heat and her body felt weak. Her friends spoke around her, but she barely heard them. Her mind kept returning to the image of water shining on metal, pouring freely into the mouth of the stranger. Thomas also returned to his camp, where the outsiders had built small shelters near their ships. He looked at the sky and wondered at the sharp beauty of the desert. Yet his thoughts returned to the girl with the cloth, the one who had looked at his flask as if it held not just water, but life itself. The night passed quietly. The next day would bring new work, new heat, and new tests of endurance. For Nira, Thirst would again become her companion. For Thomas, the question of how to respond to what he had seen would grow stronger. On Zoran, water was the measure of all worth, but he carried a flask that could break this law with a single act. Neither of them knew that this act would soon change more than one life. The next morning on Zoran, the heat arrived earlier than usual. Nira woke with a dry throat and aching limbs. She rose slowly, her feet touching the warm stone floor of her small home. Her mother had left a small cup of water beside the bed, barely enough for a single swallow. Nira drank it carefully, tasting every drop. Yet she felt the heat and thirst press on her even as she finished. Today, the work at the trade station would be harder. There was always more to carry, more to fold, and more eyes watching her every move. As she walked toward the station, she noticed that the strangers had already begun to set up new tents. Thomas was among them, moving with quiet precision, adjusting ropes and checking supplies. He seemed calm yet alert, as if the desert's harshness could not disturb him. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, feeling the shame of her people, yet a faint curiosity stirred within her. The Shara had been warned by the elders to avoid contact with the outsiders. Their ways are not ours, one had said. Do not let their gifts tempt you. Nira had heard the words, but something in Thomas's presence made her feel a strange safety. He did not speak loudly. He did not judge. He only existed calmly like a tree in the wind. By midday, the sun was high and the heat pressed down on the station. Nira carried heavy bundles to the stalls, her lips dry, her hands shaking slightly. She tried to focus on her work, but the sight of Thomas taking a drink from his flask haunted her. The water glimmered in the sunlight as it touched his lips. Her throat ached with longing, and she could not help glancing at him again. Suddenly, a guard shouted across the station, "Shara girl, move faster. Do not slow the work." The word stung, sharper than the sun. Nira stumbled slightly, and one of her bundles fell. She bent quickly to pick it up, feeling her chest tighten with both exhaustion and embarrassment. Other Shara whispered warnings, but no one offered help. To ask for water would have been shameful. To faint or falter was dangerous, her vision blurred. Her legs weakened. She wanted to call out for help, but feared the scolding of the elders and guards. It was as if the sun itself conspired against her. Finally, she could take no more. She sank to the ground behind a stall, gripping her knees, her breath shallow. Her body had been pushed to its limits. She closed her eyes, hoping for a moment of relief, yet the air seemed to steal all moisture from her lips. Thomas noticed immediately. He had been walking near the outer edge of the station, carrying supplies for his fellow travelers. When he saw Nira fall, he stopped. The crowd hesitated. No one moved toward her. Even other Shara watched silently, their fear and obedience stronger than their care. Thomas's human instinct to act took over. He approached quickly, his hands calm and sure. He knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. His voice was different from the harsh commands of the guards. There was concern in it, genuine concern, and not a trace of judgment. Nira looked up at him, startled. She shook her head slightly, unable to speak. The heat had made her words fragile and thin. Her lips trembled as she tried to form them, but only a dry sound escaped. Thomas understood. He reached for his flask and opened it. Water shimmered inside, cool and clear. He held it near her lips. "Drink," he said gently. "It's all right." For a moment, Nira hesitated. She remembered the elders' warnings. She remembered the whispers that called her impure. She remembered the punishments for disobedience. Yet the pain of thirst was stronger than the fear. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she leaned forward and drank. The cool water touched her lips, slid down her throat, and filled the hollow places inside her body. Relief washed over her in a way she had never known. The crowd was silent. Some of the clans whispered angrily, "How dare an outsider give water to the impure?" Yet others looked confused. They had never seen such an act. They had never seen a human treat a Shara girl as though she mattered. Nira's heart beat fast. Her body felt alive again. She looked up at Thomas, and for the first time, she saw kindness without condition. After a few moments, Thomas set the flask aside and helped her to stand. She felt steady enough to walk, but her mind was still reeling from the unexpected gift. The Shara around her glanced at one another, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. Perhaps, some thought, there was more to life than strict rules. Perhaps there was a way to survive without cruelty. Nira whispered a soft, "Thank you." Thomas smiled gently, not needing more words. Together, they returned to the edge of the station, where the sun was less severe and the wind offered a small relief. The day continued, but something had changed. Nira carried her bundles with new strength. She noticed the sky differently, the heat differently, and even the dry stones beneath her feet seemed less harsh. The act of one human, carrying nothing but water in a simple flask, had shifted something invisible but powerful. It had planted a seed of courage in Nira's heart. She began to wonder if life could be different. Perhaps she could be more than her station. Perhaps there were people in the world, even outside Zoran, who saw value in every life. As the sun sank again and the station emptied, Nira returned home slowly, feeling the memory of cool water in her body. Thomas watched from his camp, thinking quietly about what he had done. He did not know the customs fully, nor did he understand all the fear she faced, but he had acted as a human would when witnessing suffering. Small choices, he realized, could ripple far beyond a single moment. That night, Nira lay in her bed remembering the taste of water, the gentleness of a stranger, and the strange new possibility that perhaps she was not entirely defined by the rules of the world around her. Outside, the stars of Zoran shone sharply in the clear sky. Somewhere beyond those stars, Thomas would sleep, carrying a small flask and an even smaller hope. That one day, kindness could change hearts, even on a planet as harsh as theirs. Days passed on Zoran, and the sun rose again over the dusty plains. Nira had returned to her routine, carrying cloth and goods to the station. But the memory of the water and Thomas's kindness stayed with her. She moved with more purpose now, her body stronger, her mind quietly curious. Something had shifted inside her. The desert still tested her, but the world seemed less cruel than it had before. Tomas had also become a quiet presence at the station. He did not intervene in the clan's rules directly, but he moved where needed, helping the travelers and observing the people. He noticed Nira more than others. Sometimes she passed near him while laying out cloth, her hands busy, her eyes focused elsewhere. Other times she lingered a moment too long, watching him check his supplies or take a drink from the flask. They never spoke at first, but their glances were like small bridges between two worlds. One afternoon, the heat pressed heavier than usual. The air shimmered, and even the most hardened workers felt weak. Nira was setting up her bundles when a tray of water was brought for the traders. She could not drink from it, but the scent alone reminded her of the moment Thomas had helped her. She felt her throat tighten with longing and glanced toward him. He caught her eyes and nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that he remembered as well. That evening, as the station emptied, Thomas approached her quietly. "You work hard," he said softly, his voice careful. Nira looked up, startled. She had never heard anyone speak to her this way before. The clans always barked orders or scolded mistakes. She only nodded, unsure what to say. "I have more water," Thomas continued, opening his flask slightly. "If you want." Nira hesitated. The elders' rules and the fear of shame weighed on her, but the desire for relief was stronger. Slowly, she took a small sip. The cool liquid flowed down her throat, filling her body with warmth and life. She felt energy return to her limbs, and she looked at Thomas with wide eyes, gratitude shining silently. "You don't have to fear me," he said gently. "I do not see rules that take life or deny kindness as more important than caring for someone." His words were simple, yet they carried a meaning she had never heard before. Nira had always believed that her value depended on obedience, that her place in the world was fixed. Now she realized something new. There was kindness in the universe that did not ask for obedience. The next days brought subtle changes. Nira felt braver. She began speaking quietly to other Shara, sharing small stories of survival, of finding hidden pools of water or helping one another carry heavy loads. Some listened, some remained silent, but slowly, courage began to spread among the impure. Thomas would occasionally join her, offering water discreetly, speaking of distant worlds and stars beyond Zoran, teaching them ideas they had never heard. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the desert, Nira and Thomas found a quiet place away from the station. She asked him about the stars and the places beyond. He described planets with forests, rivers, and gentle rains, places where water was abundant and kindness was valued. Nira listened, imagining the soft sound of streams, the cool feeling of rain on skin. It felt like a dream, yet the memory of water from his flask reminded her it could be real. Their conversations grew longer and deeper. Nira began to trust Thomas completely, sharing her fears, her dreams, and her questions about the world. She had never spoken freely before. Thomas never judged her. He only listened, offering gentle guidance and understanding. In him, she found a companion who valued her thoughts, her life, and her courage. The people around the station began to notice subtle shifts as well. Some Shara started to carry small flasks or jugs secretly, sharing water among themselves in small ways. Whispers spread among the clans. "Why do they need the outsider?" some asked. "Why does he give what we do not?" Others watched quietly, unsure how to respond, but sensing that perhaps old rules could change. Nira felt a new sense of strength within her. She understood that the gift of water had not been merely for survival. It had been a gift of trust, of recognition, of hope. She began to see herself differently, not as impure, but as someone capable of courage and kindness. The desert, still harsh and unyielding, no longer seemed a prison. It was a place where small acts of bravery and care could ripple outward, touching hearts and minds. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep oranges and soft reds, Nira and Thomas stood together at the edge of the station. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. Nira realized that this simple connection, built on trust and kindness, had the power to change everything. She had tasted water, but she had also tasted hope, and it was sweeter than any stream or well on Zoran. That night she slept with a quiet smile. The desert still held challenges, still demanded endurance, but now she knew that she was not alone. Somewhere among the stars and here in the harsh sands of her world, she had found someone who believed in the power of care. And in that belief, a new journey was beginning, one that could change not only her life but the lives of all who had been told they were impure. The desert of Zoran had grown quieter in the early hours of morning. The twin moons had set, and the first light of the sun stretched across the sands. Nira walked toward the trade station with a feeling she had never felt before. Hope. She felt it in the strength of her legs, in the steady beat of her heart, and in the soft warmth that rose in her chest whenever she thought of Thomas. The small acts of kindness and courage that had begun weeks before now felt like a spark ready to light. Something larger. The station was bustling, as it always was in the morning. Merchants moved quickly, carrying goods across the circle of stone. Guards stood tall, keeping order, and the clans watched their territory carefully. But something had begun to shift. The Shara moved with confidence. They no longer bowed their heads in shame, nor did they whisper nervously when they passed the water stalls. Nira noticed this, and a quiet pride filled her chest. Change was beginning. Thomas arrived shortly after, carrying his flask as always. His presence was calm and steady, but today it seemed to carry a new energy. He greeted Nira with a simple smile. "Are you ready for the day?" he asked. Nira nodded, feeling a confidence she had not known before. "I am," she said, her voice clear and strong. The day was filled with work, but it also carried a subtle excitement. Traders moved goods, and Nira helped organize cloth and food. Thomas moved among the people, offering small gestures of help and kindness without drawing attention. The Shara began to share small flasks of water among themselves openly, smiling at each other, whispering words of encouragement, and even offering help to others. By midday, the heat was strong, but it did not break their spirits. The elders began to notice. They whispered among themselves, unsure how to respond. Some were angry, some confused, but even they could not deny the strength and courage showing in the Shara. Nira and Thomas stood together at the edge of the station, quietly observing the change. They did not speak. They did not need to. The world around them was beginning to feel different. As the sun climbed higher, a new problem appeared. A sudden wind blew across the station, carrying dust and sand in thick clouds. Merchants and workers struggled to keep their goods and themselves safe. Nira's hands shook as she tried to hold the bundles in place. The Shara nearby hesitated, unsure how to help. Thomas stepped forward, offering guidance calmly. "Stand close together," he said. "Help each other and we will be safe." The people followed his instructions. Shara and clan members alike moved together, holding coverings over food, securing loose goods and creating small barriers against the wind. Nira noticed how the human stranger's words carried weight, not because he demanded it, but because he acted with care and wisdom. The crisis passed, and the desert wind left them unscathed. People looked at one another with new respect, realizing that cooperation could solve problems that fear and tradition could not. That evening, As the sun began to set, Nira and Thomas found a quiet spot outside the station. The sky was a deep orange and the twin moons were rising again. Nira looked at the horizon, feeling the cool relief of evening settle over her body. Thomas offered her the flask once more and she drank, savoring the water as if it carried all the strength and courage she had gained. "You have changed more than you know," Thomas said quietly. "And you have helped others change too." Nira smiled, feeling the truth of his words. She had begun to see herself not as impure, not as weak, but as someone capable of courage, kindness, and hope. The small acts of bravery she had taken, guided by the simple gift of water, had rippled across the people of Zoran. The next days continued with work, but the difference was clear. The elders, though still cautious, allowed the Shara to share water freely. Small flasks appeared in homes, and families helped one another with new care. Nira saw smiles where there had once been fear, and heard laughter where there had been whispers of shame. The desert still demanded respect, still tested endurance, but now kindness and courage walked beside it, creating a balance of strength and care. One evening, under the twin moons, Nira and Thomas walked along the edge of the desert. The stars above were clear and bright, stretching endlessly into the distance. Nira turned to him. "Do you think people will always remember?" she asked softly. Thomas shook his head with a gentle smile. "They will remember because they have seen the choice. And once you see that choice, it cannot be forgotten. Courage and kindness leave marks deeper than fear ever can." Nira felt her heart swell with a warmth she could not describe. It was more than hope. It was love, simple and true, built on trust, care, and shared understanding. The harsh desert, the sun, the long days of struggle, they had not disappeared, but they no longer held power over her spirit. She had water, yes, but she had more than that. She had freedom of choice, and she had someone who believed in her. Together, they returned to the station the next morning, side by side. Nira felt a quiet strength within her, and she noticed it in the eyes of the Shara around her. Courage was contagious. Acts of kindness could not be hidden, and even the elders began to see that life and care were stronger than rules that denied water or opportunity. The world of Zoran was beginning to change, and Nira understood that this change had started with a single simple act. A human offering water to a girl who had been called impure. As the sun rose high over the desert, Nira and Thomas stood at the edge of the station, looking at the people around them. The Shara were no longer bowed in shame. The clans were beginning to reconsider their traditions. And in the quiet between tasks, in the shared moments of water, laughter, and effort, a new understanding had grown. For Nira, the journey had been long, but she felt alive in a way she never had before. She had learned that courage, care, and love could change even the harshest world, and in the bright eyes of Thomas, in the simple sharing of water, she had found the promise of a better life not only for herself, but for everyone around her. Zoran was still a desert, still a challenge, but now it was a desert where hope flowed freely, like water from a shared flask, and where love could grow stronger than any law. Weeks had passed since Thomas had first offered Nira water from his flask. The desert heat remained relentless, but Nira's strength had grown. Her steps were steadier, her hands sure, and her mind more curious about the world beyond the harsh stones of Zoran. Yet the people around her remained bound by old rules, and the elders still whispered that the Shara were impure and must remain so. Despite this, a quiet change was stirring. The Shara began to move with a little more confidence, inspired by the small courage Nira had gained from Thomas's act of kindness. They exchanged glances of understanding, shared words of encouragement, and occasionally helped one another without the elders noticing. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it existed. One day, Nira was at the edge of the station, carrying a tray of food and water for the traders. She noticed Thomas adjusting the ropes of his tent, his movements careful and calm. She felt the familiar pull of gratitude and curiosity, remembering how his simple act of giving water had changed her world. For the first time, she wanted to speak with him not only about survival, but about hope and possibility. As she approached, Thomas looked up and smiled. "You have grown stronger," he said simply. Nira nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Your water helped?" she replied softly. He shook his head, refusing credit. "It was not the water. It was you. You chose to drink, and that showed courage. You have always had strength inside." Nira paused, thinking about his words. Strength inside. For years she had been told she was weak, unworthy, impure, and yet Thomas saw something different. He saw the courage she had hidden, the quiet determination to survive, and the spark of kindness in her heart. Over the next days, Nira and Tomas began to talk quietly whenever they could. They shared stories of their lives, of the stars and planets Thomas had visited, and of the small joys Nira found in the desert. Thomas spoke of places where water was abundant, where people shared freely without fear or judgment. Nira listened, imagining streams of clear water, the soft sound of rain and the gentle touch of cool wind on her face. The elders noticed this growing closeness. They whispered among themselves, some angry, some confused. "Why does the human give water to her?" they asked. "Does he not know the laws of Zoran?" Others, however, began to wonder if perhaps the rules had been too harsh. They had never seen a child of the Shara treated with respect, and the sight of Nira standing taller, speaking with confidence, challenged their long-held beliefs. One afternoon, Nira and Tomas found a quiet place beneath the shadow of a large rock. The sun was high and the wind brought relief from the heat. Nira spoke of her dreams, of wanting to see the stars for herself, of hoping that one day the Shara could live without fear of being denied life's most basic gifts. Thomas listened, nodding, and told her that hope was the most powerful thing a person could carry. As the days passed, the change grew. More Shara began to speak up when water was brought to the station. Some shared small flasks among themselves, quietly defying the old rules. Thomas offered help discreetly, not forcing change but allowing kindness to grow naturally. Nira felt proud, not only of herself but of the people around her who were beginning to realize that they were not defined by what others called them. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the desert, Nira stood with Thomas on the edge of the station. They watched the sky turn deep blue, dotted with stars. "Do you think it can change?" she asked softly. Thomas smiled. "Change comes slowly, but it does come. Even a small act of care can ripple farther than you imagine. What we do matters." Nira felt a sense of peace she had never known. The desert was still harsh, the sun still strong, but now she understood that courage and kindness could exist even in the most difficult places. She looked at Thomas and felt a connection deeper than friendship. It was trust, respect, and the quiet warmth of understanding. The night passed and Nira returned home, carrying the hope of a future where she and the Shara could live without fear. The elders would still speak and the laws of Zoran would not change overnight, but she had learned that the heart could be braver than the rules of men. The water from a single flask had done more than quench thirst. It had opened the door to a new way of life, a new way of seeing herself, and a new hope for love, kindness, and change on a planet that had long forgotten the power of compassion. In the quiet hours, Nira thought about the day when more would see that strength and purity were not measured by birth or station, but by courage, care, and the choices one made. She knew that the path would be long, but with Thomas beside her, she felt ready to walk it. Together, they were beginning to show that even a small light could shine brightly in the desert, guiding others toward hope and a better tomorrow.